The chamber of the Galactic Council glowed with the soft hum of alien voices, each one convinced of its superiority, each one convinced of its own civilization's eternal dominion. The vote had been swift, arrogant, and final. Earth would be invaded. The motion passed with a majority, almost casual in its dismissal of the species they thought too primitive, too fractured, too emotional to matter. The councilors laughed in their jeweled robes, their chitinous limbs tapping in smug rhythm, their scaled jaws curling with disdain. Earth, to them, was not a world. It was a quarry. Its oceans were resources, its lands were spoils, its people nothing more than inconvenient animals to be subdued. The fleets were dispatched with parades and speeches about the inevitability of conquest, but they had not studied us well enough. The invasion began with silence from Earth. The first fleet descended over cities with dazzling ships that blocked the sun. But instead of surrender, humanity responded with fire, rage, and something the Council had never accounted for: unity born of desperation. Every war humanity had ever fought, every scar in its history, every betrayal and uprising and revolution had built a reservoir of cunning violence. The aliens saw it as weakness. They were wrong. The first city, London, burned, but not as prey burns. Guerrilla cells sprang from rubble before the alien commanders even had time to establish their bases. Streets became traps, skyscrapers became sniper nests, and every broken family became an army of their own. Soldiers and civilians blended into a force the aliens could not classify, a swarm of anger that turned every corner into a battlefield. The Council celebrated the news of the city's fall. They drank their toxins, exchanged praises, and mocked the idea that humans would resist for long. Yet, beneath the surface, reports began trickling in. Fleet losses, commanders slaughtered in their armored carriers, convoys wiped out by makeshift explosives planted by hands that should have been trembling in fear, but weren't. It was in the mountains of Eastern Europe where the tide truly shifted. A fleet division landed to secure supply lines, but they were met not by soldiers in uniforms, but by ordinary men and women, armed with stolen rifles, blades, and the raw determination to drag their enemies down into the dirt with them. Entire divisions vanished in snowstorms of steel and fire. The Council had expected victory within days. Instead, they saw their finest troops shredded in weeks. Earth was not uniting for survival alone. Earth was uniting for vengeance. The aliens could not understand it. They had fought wars with each other, yes, but those wars were ritualized, constrained by rules, fought by professional armies with clear lines of battle. Humanity had no such restraints. War, to us, was not ceremony. It was survival, and survival never played fair. Reports grew darker. Alien patrols disappearing in jungles, their ships bombarded by crude missiles that should never have pierced their shields, but somehow did. Hackers shut down fleet communications by tapping into frequencies the Council believed impenetrable. Entire orbital stations went dark, their crew slaughtered by human infiltrators who somehow reached them in stolen crafts. And through it all, Earth did not beg. Earth did not kneel. When the Council reconvened, expecting news of Earth's collapse, they were instead confronted with something they had never imagined: silence from the fleets. Silence that stretched into weeks, then months. The transmissions that did arrive carried nothing but garbled screams and sudden static. The complacency cracked that day. For the first time in centuries, the Council chambers fell into uneasy quiet. No one spoke of victory. No one mocked humanity. They all began to ask the same question that gnawed at their arrogance. What if we had underestimated them? But by then, it was already too late. Humanity was not just fighting back. Humanity was learning, adapting, and preparing to do what no conquered species had ever dared. They were preparing to take the war off Earth. The silence from Earth's battlefront stretched into a wound the Council could not ignore. Weeks passed with no victory speeches, no triumphant returns, no celebrations. The fleets that had once filled the skies of Earth like gods descending were now little more than broken carcasses falling into the oceans, or smoldering wrecks stripped clean by human hands. At first, the Council thought it was a temporary setback. The fleets would reorganize, crush the resistance, and bring order. But then came the reports that chilled them more than defeat itself. Humanity was learning. It started small. A handful of their sleek assault rifles, stolen from dead soldiers, turned up in the hands of guerrilla fighters. Alien weapons that should have been useless without specialized training were now firing with deadly accuracy. Humans had taken them apart, studied them, and figured out how to wield them in days. Within weeks, ambushes grew sharper, deadlier. Squads of alien troops disappeared into alleys that seemed too quiet, only to be erased by precision blasts from their own weapons, turned against them by enemies they had mocked as barely tool-using primates. The Council's commanders underestimated this, dismissing it as scavenging. But soon, entire alien tanks went missing. Dropships vanished from landing sites. And then, most horrifying of all, an entire destroyer-class warship, orbiting over South America, was hijacked. Not by a rival alien race, not by infiltration from within, by humans. The destroyer, meant to terrorize cities into submission, reappeared 2 weeks later above the Pacific Fleet staging ground and opened fire. Alien ships burned under the bombardment of their own technology, their own cannons. By the time reinforcements arrived, the hijacked destroyer was gone, already descending toward the Earth's surface where it could hide among storms and mountains, shielded by a world the aliens did not understand. On Earth, unity was not a choice anymore. It was instinct. Nations that had once eyed each other with suspicion now shared intelligence and resources because there was no longer a choice between allies and enemies, only survival. From Moscow to New York, from Cairo to Mumbai, from Lagos to Santiago, leaders spoke the same message. We fight or we burn. Borders blurred, languages mixed. Soldiers marched under banners they had once sworn to destroy. Humanity had never known peace, but now it had found something stronger. Purpose. The aliens were not facing governments anymore. They were facing the species itself. In the ashes of London, resistance fighters organized under leaders who did not care about titles or nations. A farmer who lost his family became a commander of hundreds, his rage sharper than steel. In the forests of South America, tribes who had lived in isolation for centuries emerged with knowledge of land that turned alien patrols into prey. In the deserts, smugglers and mercenaries banded together, building black markets where stolen alien tech was stripped, modified, and redistributed to fighters across the globe. But humanity's greatest weapon was not rage. It was memory. Every tactic learned across centuries of war resurfaced. Ambushes perfected in the jungles of Vietnam, city fighting refined in Stalingrad, insurgency born in the mountains of Afghanistan, all reborn, all sharpened, all turned against an enemy that could not comprehend why their overwhelming power crumbled against barbarians with crude tools. The Council began to panic. In their history, wars had always been predictable. They fought, they negotiated, and they annexed. But this war was different. It was not a war of honor. It was not a war of soldiers facing soldiers. It was survival. And survival is never clean. Council fleets began withdrawing from exposed positions, regrouping in orbit to protect supply lines. But even in space, humanity's defiance reached them. Crude rockets, designed for exploration decades ago, were refitted into weapons. Old satellites, long thought obsolete, were repurposed into guided bombs. The skies above Earth became death traps, not safe havens. The first orbital station the Council had built above Earth was reduced to burning fragments by a swarm of improvised missiles launched from submarines. The aliens called it sabotage. Humanity called it evening the scales. And then the unthinkable happened. Humans captured a cruiser intact. It had landed for resupply in the ruins of Tokyo, guarded by elite soldiers, its shields temporarily down. The resistance struck with precision and fury. Explosives breached the hull, fighters stormed in, and within hours the alien crew lay dead. The cruiser rose into the sky again, but not under alien command. The Council's broadcasts tried to spin it as propaganda, lies to keep humans hopeful. But the truth came when that same cruiser emerged from the clouds over Beijing and opened fire. Not on humans, but on the alien fleet above the city. The Council realized something with bone-deep dread. Humanity wasn't content with survival. Humanity wanted revenge. Months passed. The war was no longer one-sided. It was a storm, and the Council's fleets were drowning in it. In Africa, resistance armies became organized legions, equipped with both stolen alien weapons and human ingenuity. They carved victories into the soil, pushing back occupation zones until entire regions were free. In Europe, underground bunkers became command centers, where generals and civilians alike planned operations that crippled alien logistics. Entire supply convoys vanished into ambushes, set in forests that stretched for miles. In the Americas, naval fleets once thought obsolete struck with terrifying efficiency, sinking alien carriers with torpedoes designed decades earlier but modified to pierce shields. And in Asia, humanity achieved the impossible. Using stolen propulsion technology, engineers launched their first true counterattack into space. A ragtag fleet of modified rockets, hijacked alien shuttles, and human-made warheads assaulted a Council station orbiting near the moon. The station, meant to oversee Earth's subjugation, was torn apart in fire and silence. The Council could not believe it. Their empire had lasted thousands of years. They had crushed dozens of species before, each one bending under their might. But this was different. They had never faced a species like humanity. Fear crept into the Council chamber. For the first time in living memory, arguments turned to shouting. Shouting turned to accusations. Accusations turned to fear of betrayal among themselves. Some demanded total extermination of Earth, scorch the planet, glass the surface, erase the species. Others warned that even such destruction would not end it, for humanity had already shown it could reach the stars. The arrogance was gone. The complacency was shattered. But fear only sharpened humanity's resolve. When the first organized human fleet launched from Earth's orbit, its ships were ugly, patched together with human steel and alien cores, crude by the Council's standards. But they flew, and they fought, and they won. The Council's patrol squadrons fell not to numbers, but to sheer unpredictability. Humans did not fight like anyone else. They rammed ships rather than retreat. They turned nuclear warheads into makeshift weapons that crippled entire armadas. They used desperation as a weapon, fury as a shield, and death as a tool. And still, they did not kneel. On the Council's homeworld, whispers spread of a terrifying possibility. Humanity might not just resist, humanity might win. In dark corners of the chamber, where robes rustled and eyes glimmered with dread, counselors spoke words they had never spoken before. What if we cannot stop them? The galaxy had laughed at humans, dismissed them as violent primitives. Now, Species across the stars were watching in awe and terror as Earth bled but never broke. For the first time in its history, the Council feared not the unknown, but the very thing it had tried to conquer: humanity. And on Earth itself, men stood atop the ruins of their cities, staring into the skies not with despair, but with fire in their eyes. They had buried their dead, but in their grief they found something sharper than sorrow. They had found a promise. That promise was simple. We will not only survive, we will make them remember who we are. The war was no longer about resistance, it was about retribution, and humanity was ready to carry it into the stars. The stolen cruiser hovered above the stratosphere, patched together with human steel, duct-taped wiring, and scavenged alien systems that hummed with strange energy. Its hull bore scars of a dozen battles, plasma burns etched across its plating, and crude human graffiti smeared over alien insignias. No masters here. Inside, the crew was a mixture of soldiers, engineers, hackers, and civilians who had lost everything. None of them were trained for space war, yet they were the first humans to command an alien warship, and they weren't interested in survival anymore. They were planning something far larger. The resistance had proven Earth could not be broken. But Earth itself was still a battlefield. Cities smoldered, families mourned, and fleets still orbited, striking at any weakness. To end the war, to tear away the illusion of alien invincibility, humanity had to go further. They had to carry the fight to the stars. The plan was reckless, even suicidal, but humanity had always thrived in the impossible. With the cruiser as their spearhead, the Resistance gathered knowledge from stolen alien databases, piecing together star maps that revealed the Council's closest staging ground, a supply hub orbiting a barren moon, only a few light-years away. It was the heart of their invasion, where troop carriers refueled, where munitions stockpiles were stored, where the Council's generals directed assaults on Earth. Strike there, and the Council would feel it. Strike there, and the galaxy would see humans not as prey, but as predators. The journey itself nearly killed them. The cruiser's drives, damaged during capture, sputtered and tore through space like a wounded beast. Radiation leaked into the cabins. Systems failed in bursts of sparks. More than once, the ship drifted powerless, the crew working in silence, hands trembling but refusing to surrender. They were not explorers, nor conquerors. They were ghosts of a dying world, carrying vengeance in their veins. When they finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the sight froze them. The supply hub hung in the void like a mechanical sun, its surface crawling with spires, docking rings, and fields of shimmering shields. Dozens of alien ships orbited nearby, patrols, freighters, destroyers. To the Council, it was a fortress. To the humans, it was a target. No one on that cruiser expected to survive. But they were not there to survive. They were there to send a message. The first strike was chaos. The cruiser emerged from the void under false identification codes stolen from a dead alien officer. For 7 precious minutes, the hub's scanners accepted them. In that silence, the humans moved like wolves. Missiles, crude and retrofitted from Earth's nuclear arsenal, fired from hidden launchers welded into the cruiser's hull. Shields flared, alarms screamed, and in the confusion, the humans rammed the cruiser straight through a supply freighter, tearing its belly apart and scattering munitions in a silent explosion across the void. Alien patrols scrambled, fighters launched in swarms, but the humans were already inside the hub's defenses, close enough to make targeting difficult. They moved like insurgents, not soldiers, weaving between ships, striking weak points, detonating reactors. Every human aboard the cruiser knew they would die, but each one intended to take as many as possible with them. The hub's communications blacked out within the first half hour. Human hackers had bypassed security systems, filling channels with loops of alien screams recorded during Earth's battles. Panic spread through the hub's command ranks. They thought they faced an organized fleet, not a single stolen cruiser and a crew of the desperate. Inside the hub, chaos reigned. Small boarding pods, improvised from escape capsules, slammed into docking rings. Human fighters poured out, armed with stolen rifles and explosives strapped to their chests. They weren't there to hold territory. They were there to kill, sabotage, and burn. Corridors lit up with plasma fire. Humans fought in silence, their rage sharper than their screams. Every detonation ripped through fuel lines. Every sabotage cut power from critical systems. Alien soldiers tried to regroup, but they faced an enemy that did not retreat. An enemy that had nothing left to lose. When the hub's reactor went critical, alarms echoed across the system. Alien captains screamed for retreat, but it was too late. The humans had planted charges, using the hub's own energy reserves as fuel for the fire. The explosion lit the void like a newborn star. The hub's superstructure fractured, breaking apart in blinding silence. Ships nearby, caught in the shockwave, tore open like paper. Debris rained across the system, scattering alien bodies into the cold. The humans did not survive. The cruiser was gone, consumed in the firestorm. Every fighter who boarded the hub was vaporized in the inferno. But the message lived. When word reached the council, the chamber fell into stunned silence. They had seen rebellions before, insurgencies, even terrorist strikes. But never this. A single human crew had destroyed a hub that supported an entire sector. Dozens of ships lost, thousands of troops dead, supplies gone. A humiliation that rippled through every corner of their empire. For the first time in centuries, fear spread not just through the council, but through the species under its rule. Whispers began in hidden marketplaces, in backwater colonies. If humans can wound the council, maybe the council is not invincible. The complacency was crumbling, not just in their halls, but across the galaxy. On Earth, the news arrived through coded transmissions smuggled back by resistance networks. When survivors on the ground heard what the crew had done, silence fell across camps and bunkers. Then came the cheering, then the rage, then the promise. Humanity did not see the strike as the death of heroes. Humanity saw it as proof. Proof that the council could bleed. Engineers who had been salvaging scraps now worked without rest, building weapons that could reach further, fly longer, strike harder. Hackers poured into alien databases with renewed fury, dragging secrets into the light. Soldiers, mercenaries, and civilians alike swore oaths not of survival, but of vengeance. The strike had cost hundreds of human lives, but it had lit a fire in billions. The council tried to respond with terror. They dispatched a fleet to orbit Earth, larger than any before, intent on burning the planet to ashes. Their propaganda declared humanity broken, the rebellion finished, the hub's destruction meaningless. But when that fleet descended, they were not met by scattered resistance or desperate fighters. They were met by a planet united. Cities rose from ruins with defenses powered by alien tech. Humans had ripped apart and reassembled. Missiles fired from hidden silos in deserts, forests, and mountains. Fleets of stolen shuttles launched from hidden bases, their hulls painted with human flags. And above Earth, waiting in the shadows, was the beginning of something the Council had feared most. A human fleet. Crude, ugly, stitched together from steel and stolen drives, but a fleet nonetheless. The battle was not even. Humanity lost ships, cities, lives. But for every human death, 2 alien warships fell. For every bomb dropped, 10 more rose in reply. The fleet that was meant to scorch Earth ended as wreckage burning in the atmosphere, raining fire into oceans and plains. The Council had wanted to remind humanity of its place. Instead, they reminded humanity that survival was not enough. The next phase of the war had begun, and deep within the resistance bunkers, a new doctrine formed. If a single ship could destroy a hub, what could a fleet do to the Council itself? The thought was madness. Humanity was still fragile, still rebuilding, still bleeding. But madness was how humanity had survived. Madness was how they had turned stolen rifles into weapons of war. Madness was how they had turned a single cruiser into a legend. Madness would be how they ended this war. The galaxy had underestimated humans once. They would not make the mistake again. But now, it no longer mattered. Because the humans no longer cared about what the galaxy thought. They were preparing to leave their cradle, not as explorers, not as prey, but as hunters. And the Council, for all its fleets and arrogance, was beginning to realize a truth that sent shivers through their bones. They had awakened something that would never sleep again. The smoke of the Council's defeat still lingered in the void. Across the galaxy, the destruction of the supply hub echoed like a crack in a dam. For centuries, the Council had been untouchable, a monolith of power that brooked no challenge. Now, word spread that a primitive species had not only resisted, but had taken the fight into the stars and burned one of the Council's arteries to ash. The Council tried to control the story. They called it sabotage, terrorism, a lucky accident. But their empire was too wide, too brittle, and too many eyes had seen the firestorm with their own sensors. The lie could not hold. The galaxy whispered. Humans struck back. On Earth, the resistance was no longer a ragged collection of cells. It was becoming something larger, something terrifying in its focus. In bunkers carved into mountains, engineers toiled without rest, fusing alien cores into human ships, building fleets out of wreckage. Laboratories hummed with feverish energy, where scientists who had once designed satellites and probes now crafted weapons meant to pierce warships. But it wasn't just Earth anymore. For the first time since the invasion began, signals were reaching humanity from beyond. Weak transmissions, scrambled and careful, but unmistakable. Other voices. The first came from a mining colony on the far edge of Council space, inhabited by a species humanity had never heard of. Slender, insectoid beings with translucent shells, long enslaved to extract resources for the Council. Their message was simple, desperate, and trembling with hope. If you fight them, we will help. The second came from smugglers, outlaws, drifters who had always lived on the fringes of the Council's order. They offered information, trade, passage through hidden routes, not out of loyalty, but out of opportunity. A rebellion meant profit, and profit meant survival. The third came from silence, broken by courage. Entire species that had once bowed their heads now whispered, "Maybe the Council can bleed. Maybe we don't have to kneel forever." At first, humans did not trust it. Why would they? They had been invaded, enslaved, slaughtered. They had buried children and watched cities burn. The thought of trusting alien voices felt like madness. But war had taught humanity something the Council never understood. Survival is not isolation. Survival is alliances, forged not from trust but from need. So emissaries went out. Not politicians, not diplomats, but soldiers, engineers, and fighters who had lived through fire. They carried scars instead of titles, stories instead of treaties. One of the first meetings took place in the ruins of a Council prison asteroid, liberated by human raiders. There, in the smoking corridors, humans sat across from insectoid miners with trembling limbs. There were no long speeches, No declarations. The human commander simply said, "We fight. If you want to fight too, stand with us." The insectoids bowed their heads. They had no armies, no fleets. But they had knowledge, maps of hidden mining tunnels, secret supply routes, weaknesses in council patrols. Knowledge was power, and humanity took it eagerly. Not all alliances were so simple. The smugglers demanded proof that humanity could pay. They wanted technology, weapons, safe passage across Earth's atmosphere. For weeks, arguments raged, deals collapsed, trust shattered. But then, during a raid on a council convoy, humans captured something that changed everything. Crates of council currency, untraceable and priceless on the black markets of the galaxy. When the smugglers saw it, their tone changed. "Humans bleed," one smuggler said, "but humans pay too." From then on, smuggling rings became humanity's veins, carrying supplies, information, even alien defectors into Earth's growing fleet. And then there were the others. Species broken by centuries of council dominance, too terrified to rise even when opportunity knocked. Humans did not beg them. Humans did not plead. Instead, they showed them the fire, recordings of the hub's destruction, images of alien warships burning in Earth's skies, stories of men and women who had died with bombs strapped to their chests, tearing down invaders with their own hands. "Look," the humans said, "they can be killed. They can be broken. If we can do it, so can you." Some still refused, too bound by fear. But others felt something they had buried for centuries: rage. Meanwhile, the council tried to regain control. Fleets doubled their patrols, governors tightened their fists, propaganda screamed across the stars. But every act of repression only fueled the whispers. If they are so strong, why are they afraid? And the council was afraid. Meetings in their grand chamber turned into shouting matches. Some councilors demanded Earth's annihilation, a full planetary burn. Others argued that such a move would only confirm humanity's legend and ignite further rebellion. They were trapped between their arrogance and their fear, unable to decide, unable to act with the decisiveness that had once defined them. For the first time in centuries, the council looked weak. On Earth, preparations for the next strike consumed every waking moment. The stolen cruiser had shown what was possible. Now, engineers were building more. Ships welded from scrap, powered by alien drives, guided by human desperation. They were ugly things. Hulls mismatched, plating uneven, weapons bolted on without symmetry. No council fleet would mistake them for proper warships. But when they launched, when they flew, when they fired, they killed. And that was all that mattered. Training was brutal. Pilots learned in weeks what should have taken years. Soldiers drilled with both human rifles and alien plasma cannons until their arms bled. Civilians were pressed into service, learning to repair hull breaches, man turrets, operate navigation systems. Every ship was a coffin, and every crew knew it. But they lined up anyway. Because humanity was not only fighting for survival anymore, humanity was fighting for vengeance. The first joint strike with alien allies came sooner than anyone expected. Through the insectoids' maps and the smugglers' networks, humanity learned of a council convoy moving through a narrow corridor of space. It carried weapons, fuel, and reinforcements meant to suppress uprisings in the outer colonies. Destroy that convoy, and thousands of would-be rebels might rise. The humans did not hesitate. Their fleet was small, 6 patched-together ships, manned by volunteers who had never seen space before. Alongside them flew a handful of insectoid miners in stolen freighters, and 2 smuggler vessels retrofitted for combat. It was a force that should have been laughed at, dismissed, forgotten. But when they struck, the void lit up with fury. The convoy expected pirates, not war. They expected hunger, not vengeance. When the first human torpedo ripped through a fuel tanker, the chain reaction tore half the convoy apart in a single blaze. Alien patrol ships scrambled, but they were met by a swarm of fighters diving with suicidal precision. The smugglers, driven by profit, fought with merciless efficiency. The insectoids, driven by centuries of slavery, fought with trembling but unstoppable rage. And the humans, driven by grief and fury, fought like demons. By the time the last patrol ship burned, the convoy was gone. Every crate of weapons and fuel had been seized, every survivor executed, every scrap of technology stripped. The Council had lost another artery, and across the stars, more whispers rose. But alliances were fragile. The smugglers grew greedy, demanding greater shares. The insectoids feared reprisal and considered retreat. Even among humanity, voices rose in conflict. Leaders arguing over strategy, factions dividing over how far to push the war. In the end, unity did not come from trust. Unity came from necessity, because the Council's response was swift. A fleet of warships larger than anything yet seen was dispatched to hunt down the human infestation. It was no longer just about Earth. It was about sending a message to every corner of the galaxy. Rebellion will be crushed. The hunters had come. And humanity, with its fragile fleet and newborn alliances, would have to decide: fight and burn, or kneel and die. The Council thought the threat would break them, but it had the opposite effect. When word reached Earth, the bunkers fell silent. Then, one by one, men and women stood. Farmers, soldiers, engineers, smugglers, miners, outlaws, they all stood. Not because they thought they would win. Not because they believed survival was certain. They stood because they knew what surrender meant. Surrender meant chains. Surrender meant their children ground into dust. Surrender meant the end of everything humanity had ever been. Better to burn the stars themselves than to kneel. So the orders went out, every ship to launch, every weapon to fire, every ally to fight. And as the Council's grand fleet descended, the humans prepared to teach them the same lesson they had taught at the hub. That prey, when cornered, does not cower. Prey, when cornered, becomes predator. The Council's fleet came like an eclipse. From Earth's night skies, they appeared first as streaks of burning light, tearing across the heavens like falling stars. Then the ships emerged, hundreds of them, dark and gleaming, blotting out constellations. Warships larger than cities, carriers bristling with fighters, destroyers armed with enough firepower to level continents. This was no patrol, no scattered occupation force. This was annihilation. The Council was done with half measures. They had debated, argued, hesitated, but fear had finally tipped them. Earth would burn, and every whisper of rebellion across the galaxy would burn with it. On the ground, people watched the sky with clenched fists. Sirens wailed across ruined cities. Bunkers groaned with the weight of evacuees. Soldiers strapped on scavenged gear. Every man, woman, and child knew what was coming. Some wept, some prayed, most simply prepared. Above them in orbit, humanity's fleet gathered. It was pitiful compared to the armada descending. A dozen stitched-together cruisers, maybe 40 smaller ships, each one scarred, patched, and trembling from overuse. Alongside them drifted insectoid freighters fitted with crude weapons, smuggler vessels painted in mismatched colors, even civilian crafts modified for combat. They looked like junk, but they were humanity's junk, and they were all that stood between Earth and fire. Command was chaos. In a bunker deep beneath the ruins of Moscow, resistance leaders barked orders through scrambled channels. On one of the largest patched-together cruisers, a grizzled commander named Harrington spoke over the fleet's intercom. "We know what's coming," he growled. "We know what they want. They want us gone. They want us erased. But we're still here. We're still breathing. And as long as we are, we fight." His voice shook with fury, with exhaustion, with something more ancient than either, defiance. "They think this is the end. But I'll tell you what it is. This is the beginning. They've brought their fleet. Good. Let's show them what humanity does when cornered." The fleet roared back, voices shouting, weapons powering, drives igniting. The battle began at the edge of Earth's orbit. Council destroyers swept in first, firing beams of plasma that cut through the void like lightning. Human ships scattered, their crude shields flaring, hulls shuddering under impacts. Several were torn apart in the opening minutes, burning wreckage falling into the atmosphere like meteors. But the humans did not scatter in panic. They fought. From the surface, nuclear missiles launched from hidden silos, streaking upward in brilliant arcs. Submarines surfaced and fired modified torpedoes into the sky, their warheads designed to pierce the shields the aliens had thought impenetrable. Satellites that had once carried weather sensors now fired improvised railguns, tearing into enemy fighters. And from the fleet itself came fire. Human ships moved not with discipline, but with madness. They dove headlong into enemy formations, ramming, detonating, clawing at weak points with weapons that should never have worked. But did. A council carrier exploded when a human freighter, loaded with explosives, rammed into its hangar bay and ignited. A destroyer spun out of control when its thrusters were jammed by debris hurled by a scavenger ship. Every loss the humans suffered was answered with fury tenfold. On the ground, the battle was no less fierce. Dropships pierced the atmosphere, unloading council troops into ruined cities. Streets became killing fields. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, throwing Molotov cocktails into armored convoys, dragging invaders into alleyways where knives and fire waited. Every building became a fortress, every sewer a tunnel for ambush, every child an extra pair of hands carrying ammunition. Earth itself rose against the invaders, not with clean armies, but with teeth and claws and fire. Alien commanders could not comprehend it. They had expected submission. They had expected collapse. Instead, they found a species that fought like rabid animals, every loss only making them more dangerous. The battle raged for days. By the third day, Earth's orbit was a graveyard. Wreckage drifted in clouds, both human and alien ships torn apart, their fragments scattering across the void. Flames licked through the skies, turning night into false dawn. But something extraordinary was happening. The Council's fleet, vast and terrible, wasn't breaking humanity. It was bleeding. Ship after ship fell to suicidal tactics, to improvised weapons, to sheer human fury. Losses mounted higher than the Council had ever imagined possible against such a primitive world. And then came the turning point. A group of insectoid freighters, once slaves, had been tasked with carrying supplies for the human fleet. When the battle reached its bloodiest point, they turned, not away, but toward the Council. They rammed straight into the enemy lines, detonating their fuel reserves, tearing open the flanks of a formation of destroyers. It was the first true Allied sacrifice, and it shattered the Council's formation long enough for humanity to strike. The human flagship, cobbled together from 3 wrecked cruisers, dove into the gap. Its weapons fired wildly, its hull peeling apart, but its final volley ripped straight into the Council's command ship. The detonation lit the void like a second sun. The Council's admiral was gone. Their chain of command collapsed, and humanity howled. The Council fleet did not retreat. Not yet. They fought on, driven by fear of the Council's wrath should they fail. But without coordination, their advantage crumbled. Human ships, fighters, even ground troops seized the moment. Guerrilla units struck at alien ground forces with renewed fury, driving them back toward their dropships. Orbital platforms, powered by stolen cores, fired until they burned out. Every human alive gave everything, pouring rage and grief into battle. By the seventh day, the Council could no longer deny it. They had not broken humanity. They had been broken against humanity. The order was given. Retreat. The sight of it was seared into memory forever. Council ships, once so arrogant, fled Earth's orbit trailing fire and wreckage. Fighters abandoned their carriers, drifting helplessly. Destroyers burned, their screams echoing across broken channels. The great fleet that was meant to erase humanity limped away, shattered and humiliated. On Earth, people staggered from bunkers, from ruins, from the rubble of cities. They were broken, starving, scarred. But they were alive. And above them the skies were clear. For the first time since the war began, Earth was free. The cost was unimaginable. Entire cities were gone. Millions were dead. The oceans were poisoned with wreckage, the skies scarred with fire. Humanity had bled deeper than ever before. But they had survived the impossible. And more than that, they had won. Across the galaxy, the effect was instant. Every oppressed species, every colony that had bowed under Council rule, every smuggler and outlaw heard the news. The Council had unleashed its full fury on humanity, and failed. Rebellions ignited like wildfire. Slave species rose with stolen weapons. Outlaw fleets struck Council convoys. Even within the Council itself, whispers of doubt spread. The Council's complacency was not just cracked now, it was broken. In the aftermath, Earth's leaders gathered in underground chambers. Soldiers leaned on crutches. Engineers coughed through smoke. Civilians carried the weight of loss. But they all knew the same truth. Survival was no longer enough. Humanity had proven it could not be erased. Now, it had to decide what came next. Some argued for defense. Rebuild Earth, protect what remained, wait for the Council to collapse under its own weight. Others argued for offense. Take the war to them, strike before they could regroup, tear down the Council itself. The debate was fierce, but in the end, the decision was simple. Humanity could never be safe while the Council lived. And so the order was given. The war would not stop at Earth's skies. The war would carry to the Council's throne. The ruins of Earth still smoked. Cities lay in ashes, oceans choked with the wreckage of fleets. The air thick with the ghosts of the millions who had fallen. Yet in the silence that followed the Council's retreat, a new sound began to rise. The sound of hammers, the hum of engines, the roar of construction. Humanity had no choice but to rebuild. But they did not rebuild for peace. They rebuilt for war. In underground factories, survivors worked around the clock, fusing alien cores into human hulls, welding scrap into weapons. Engineers who had once designed passenger planes were now blueprinting starships. Mechanics who had once repaired cars now stripped alien reactors bare and rewired them into power systems for orbital cannons. Every ruin became a forge. Every workshop became a shipyard. From the ashes of their cities, humanity was building something the galaxy had never seen, a fleet born not from centuries of planning, but from raw fury and desperation. They had tasted victory. Now they hungered for more. But humanity would not fight alone. The retreat of the Council's grand fleet had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Species long enslaved or cowed by the Council began to rise. Some in whispers, some in fire. The insectoid miners who had once sent their timid transmission now openly joined humanity, sending thousands of volunteers to Earth to serve as guides and allies. Smuggler clans, once cautious, now fought openly, raiding Council convoys with human support. Even more astonishing, entire colonies of oppressed species declared open rebellion, their leaders sending desperate calls for aid to Earth. They saw in humans something terrifying and beautiful, proof that the Council could be beaten. Humanity became more than a rebellion. Humanity became a symbol. Of course, not all were eager. Some species feared that humanity would simply replace the Council with another empire. Others distrusted humans' brutality, their willingness to burn everything for victory. Deals were fragile, alliances thin. But humanity did not demand loyalty. Humanity demanded action. When an alien governor hesitated to commit his fleet, human emissaries showed him recordings of Earth's battle. Children carrying rifles, women detonating charges in alien tanks, men strapping bombs to their chests. "You hesitate," the emissary said. "We do not. Decide." More often than not, the hesitant became allies. The first offensive began with raids. Human ships, crude and mismatched, slipped into Council space through smuggler routes. They struck at supply depots, patrol fleets, orbital factories. They did not hold territory. They did not announce themselves. They struck, burned, and vanished. The Council, sprawling and complacent, struggled to respond. For centuries, their enemies had always been predictable. Colonies rebelling with speeches, armies fighting in open lines. Humanity fought differently. They fought like ghosts. A convoy of Council munitions disappeared into a nebula. Its ships later found gutted, their crews slaughtered. A communication relay burned from within, its systems hacked and filled with human propaganda. Images of Earth's defense, of Council fleets fleeing in disgrace. The Council called it terrorism. The galaxy called it inspiration. But raids were only the beginning. In a hidden shipyard carved into the Andes, Earth unveiled its first true warship, the Vengeance. Unlike the patched cruisers before it, this was designed for war. A human hull reinforced with alien alloys, armed with both plasma cannons and nuclear payloads, powered by a hybrid drive that could outpace Council destroyers. It was still ugly, still scarred, but it was a ship that belonged to humanity alone. When the Vengeance launched into the sky, millions watched. For the first time, humanity was not just surviving on borrowed scraps. They were building their future, and the Vengeance was only the first. With new ships and growing allies, humanity dared what once seemed impossible. They struck a Council world. The target was a fortress planet on the rim of Council space, long used as a prison and military hub. From orbit, its surface was a maze of spires, towers, and fortifications. It had never fallen, but it had also never faced humans. The fleet descended in silence, weapons hot, engines burning. Smuggler ships darted ahead, scattering defenses. Insectoid freighters dropped ground troops in swarms, and the human flagship, the Vengeance, led the charge. The Council had fortified the planet for centuries, but their defenses were built for armies that followed rules. Humanity did not follow rules. Fighters dove into shield generators, detonating themselves to open gaps. Hackers infiltrated orbital systems, turning defense cannons against their masters. Soldiers on the ground fought not in formation, but in ambush, detonating charges under fortresses, dragging alien commanders into alleys where knives finished the work. Within a week, the fortress planet burned. Prisoners poured from its broken gates, slaves, rebels, species who had given up hope. They stared at the humans with disbelief, as if staring at legends. And then they picked up rifles and joined the war. The fall of the fortress planet sent shockwaves greater than Earth's defense. The Council had not only failed to conquer humanity, they had lost their own territory. Council chambers erupted in chaos. Some councilors screamed for extermination, demanding fleets to glass Earth and every rebellious world. Others warned that such an act would only ignite the galaxy further. But as they argued, their empire bled. Every supply line was threatened. Every outpost became a target. Every fleet risked ambush. For the first time in their history, the Council was on the defensive, yet humanity was not invincible. Every strike cost blood. Every battle left scars. Ships were lost faster than they could be built. Soldiers died by the thousands, and Earth itself, scarred and fragile, could not recover quickly. There were whispers of exhaustion, of stretching too far, too fast. Allies murmured of betrayal, smugglers demanded more payment, and some rebel worlds doubted humanity's ability to sustain the war. But then the recordings of the fortress planet's fall spread. Images of prisoners raising human banners, of alien soldiers executed in their own streets, of the Vengeance standing proud in orbit. The doubts quieted, because humanity was proving something larger than survival. They were proving destiny. In the shadows of war, a new doctrine formed among human commanders. We do not fight for peace. We fight for dominance. It was not spoken publicly, not yet, but it lived in the hearts of soldiers who had buried too many. They did not want to coexist with the Council. They wanted to erase it. And as the rebellion spread, as more worlds burned, as more fleets fell, that doctrine began to take hold across the galaxy. The oppressed no longer dreamed of freedom alone. They dreamed of victory. The Council, desperate, launched counterstrikes. They sent fleets to retake the fortress planet, to cut off supply lines, to corner the humans. But every move stretched them thinner. In one system, a Council fleet of 20 ships was ambushed by 5 human warships and a swarm of rebel fighters. It should have been no contest. Yet when the smoke cleared, 12 Council ships were gone, and the rest fled. In another system, human hackers infiltrated an entire shipyard's systems, overloading reactors until the station erupted in a fireball visible across the sector. Loss after loss piled upon the Council's record, and still humanity advanced. But Earth's leaders knew the truth. Victory was not yet certain. The Council still commanded fleets larger than humanity's entire population. They still held worlds by the thousands. Their empire, though wounded, was vast. And worst of all, they had not yet unleashed their true weapons. Rumors spread of doomsday fleets hidden in deep space, of weapons that could scorch entire planets. Humanity had no illusions. The Council would not surrender quietly, but humanity was no longer afraid. They had faced extinction and survived. They had fought the impossible and won. And now they looked into the stars not with fear, but with hunger. As the Vengeance and its fleet sailed deeper into Council space, Harrington addressed his crew. His voice was hoarse, his body scarred, but his eyes burned. "They thought Earth was weak," he said. "They thought we would break. They were wrong. We will not stop. Not here, not anywhere. Every system they control, every world they enslave, we will take it from them. And when we reach their throne, when we stand on the ashes of their Council, we will remind the galaxy who we are." The crew roared. Not prey, not slaves, predators. Across the galaxy, rebellion spread like wildfire. Every victory humanity won fanned the flames higher. Every Council defeat cracked the foundation further. The empire that had ruled for millennia was beginning to crumble. And at its heart, leading the charge, stood humanity, bloodied, scarred, and unrelenting. The Council had awakened something it could not control, and soon it would learn the final truth. The war was no longer for survival. The war was for dominance. The Council had bled. Their hub was gone. Their fortress planet burned. Their grand fleet had been humiliated and driven from Earth's skies. Everywhere the humans struck, fire followed. Everywhere their ships sailed, rebellion spread. But the Council was not dead. No empire lasts for millennia without teeth hidden in the dark. And the humans, for all their fury, had yet to see the worst of them. The first signs came as whispers. Rebel smugglers spoke of strange movements in deep space, fleets disappearing into the void, systems sealed off under martial law. Insectoid scouts reported entire sectors going dark, colonies emptied, populations vanished. Human commanders knew what it meant before the reports confirmed it. The Council was pulling back, not in retreat, but in preparation. They were gathering their doomsday fleets. For weeks, the galaxy held its breath. Human fleets advanced further into Council territory, burning worlds, liberating slaves, rallying allies. Every victory added fuel to their legend, but behind their triumphs, commanders felt the tension tightening like a noose. Something was coming. And when it came not as a fleet, but as a storm. It struck at Vega Prime, a system recently liberated by human and rebel forces. The planet had risen in open rebellion, casting off its governors, raising human banners alongside their own. Celebrations filled its cities. For the first time in generations, they felt free. The Council's response was merciless. Without warning, the sky tore open. Ships emerged, sleek, black, monstrous in size. Not the patchwork destroyers or lumbering carriers humanity had faced before. These were weapons built not for occupation, not for intimidation, but for extermination. They came with no demand for surrender, no offer of negotiation. They came with fire. The first volley leveled Vega Prime's defenses in seconds. Orbital platforms vaporized. Human cruisers shattered under beams that sliced through shields like paper. The planet's atmosphere itself burned as if set alight. And then, the weapon fired. From the lead ship, a beam descended like the wrath of a star. It struck Vega Prime's largest city and turned it to glass in moments. Millions died screaming, their bodies vaporized, their homes erased. The survivors did not even have time to grieve. The Council fired again and again, burning swathes of the planet until half its surface glowed molten red. Vega Prime did not fall. Vega Prime ceased to exist. The message was clear. This was not a war of conquest anymore. It was extermination. The Council was done playing games. Humanity had shaken their throne, and now they meant to erase humanity, and anyone who stood with them, from the galaxy. The news struck Earth like a blade. Survivors of Vega Prime's fleet limped back, their ships shattered, their eyes hollow. They carried recordings of the devastation. Cities boiling, oceans evaporating, screams silenced in fire. For the first time, even hardened resistance leaders faltered. Some argued to retreat, to fortify Earth and abandon the offensive. Others demanded retaliation so fierce that the galaxy itself would tremble. The debates raged. But in the end, the decision wasn't made by leaders. It was made by the people. Billions watched the recordings of Vega Prime. They saw the destruction. They saw the fire. They saw what surrender meant. And they chose. There would be no retreat, no surrender, no peace. If the Council wanted extermination, then humanity would answer in kind. Preparations began for the largest human offensive yet. Every ship was pulled into service. Every scrap of alien technology was stripped and reassembled. Factories ran until their workers collapsed. Children carried ammunition. Farmers welded armor plating. The war was no longer a battle for survival. It was total. And still, it would not be enough. The doomsday fleets were too powerful. Humanity could not match them ship for ship, weapon for weapon. To face them head-on would be suicide. So the humans did what they had always done. They turned desperation into strategy. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Bleed the doomsday fleets dry. They could not be destroyed in open combat. but they could be harassed, ambushed, starved. Their supply lines could be cut, their escorts dismantled, their commanders assassinated. Every time they fired their planet-killing weapons, humans would make sure they paid a price in ships, in soldiers, in blood. The war became a shadow hunt. Human fleets no longer sought decisive battles. They struck at the edges, nipping at the Council like wolves around a wounded beast. Convoys vanished into asteroid belts. Command ships exploded from within, sabotaged by infiltrators. Entire fleets found themselves lost in nebulae where human ambushers waited with nuclear traps. The Doomsday fleets were terrifying, but they were not invincible. And every time they fired, humanity made them regret it. Still, the cost was staggering. World after world burned. Millions more died. Humanity's allies faltered under the sheer scale of destruction. Some rebel species begged for mercy, trying to surrender back to the Council's rule. Others fought with renewed fury, choosing to die on their feet rather than live in chains. And humanity? Humanity bled more than all of them. Ships were lost faster than they could be built. Soldiers were buried in mass graves. Cities were reduced to ash. Yet still, the humans fought. Because they had seen what the Council offered: glass and fire. And death fighting was better than death kneeling. The turning point came at Epsilon Eridani. A human fleet of only 7 ships lured a Council Doomsday detachment of 20 into a gas giant's orbit. They fought not to win, but to buy time. Every volley tore human ships apart. Every blast silenced hundreds. But the trap was already set. Hidden in the gas giant's storms, human engineers had planted nuclear warheads scavenged from Earth's deepest arsenals, tethered to improvised drones. As the battle raged, the humans triggered them all at once. The gas giant ignited. The explosion ripped through the void like a supernova. Council ships were torn apart, their shields overloaded, their weapons silenced. Half the Doomsday fleet was gone in minutes. The human fleet perished with them, every ship annihilated, every soldier vaporized. But the message was clear. Even gods could be dragged into the fire. Across the galaxy, rebellion surged again. If humans could burn half a Doomsday fleet at the cost of 7 ships, then maybe the Council was not as invincible as it claimed. Slave uprisings multiplied. Outlaws struck convoys with reckless fury. The Council still held power. But for the first time, they felt something worse than defeat. They felt hunted. On Earth, Harrington, now scarred, his hair white, his body failing, stood before the fleet. His voice was weak, but his words cut through the air like steel. "They think their fleets can scare us," he rasped. "They think their fire can break us. But we are still here. We are still fighting. And every time they burn one of our worlds, we will burn 10 of theirs. Every time they kill one of ours, we will kill 100 of theirs. They wanted extermination. We'll give them extinction." The soldiers roared back. Not because they thought they would live, but because they had already chosen how to die. The war was no longer about Earth. It was about the galaxy itself. The Council had unleashed its Doomsday fleets, and humanity had answered with fire and fury. Every battle now was a holocaust, every victory soaked in oceans of blood. But humanity did not falter. Because for the first time in history, they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for dominance, and they would not stop until the Council's throne lay in ruins. The galaxy was on fire. Council fleets limped through broken systems, scarred and hunted. Their Doomsday weapons had shattered worlds, but every shot drained them further. Every atrocity birthed 1,000 new enemies. Humanity had not just resisted. They had spread rebellion like plague. Entire sectors now burned with uprisings. Species once bowed in silence now raised rifles, chanting Earth's name. Smugglers turned into generals. slaves into commanders, and through it all, humanity's fleet grew. Ugly, scarred, stitched together from wreckage and fury, but it grew. The Council's empire, once eternal, was crumbling. The time had come to end it. The plan was madness. The throne world lay at the heart of Council space, a fortress system surrounded by fleets, battle stations, and defenses carved into moons. For millennia, no enemy had ever come close. It was not just their capital. It was their pride, their symbol, their godhood. But pride had blinded them. Their fleets were scattered, chasing uprisings across the galaxy. Their resources stretched thin, their unity fractured. And humanity had never cared for impossible odds. So the order was given: strike the throne. The fleet that gathered above Earth was unlike anything the species had ever known. Dozens of human-built warships, still mismatched, still scarred, but stronger now, armed with weapons designed by desperate genius. Beside them flew insectoid freighters refitted into carriers, smuggler cruisers bristling with stolen cannons, rebel vessels painted in the colors of 100 worlds. They were not uniform. They were not orderly, but they were a fleet. At its head sailed the Vengeance, still battered but unbroken, its hull engraved with the names of every ship and soldier who had fallen. When it rose into the void, billions on Earth cheered, not in hope of survival, but in hunger for retribution. The journey to the throne world was a gauntlet. Council scouts harried them, patrol fleets ambushed them, saboteurs slipped aboard their ships. Every system burned with resistance, but humanity had learned. Every ambush was answered with fury. Every scout was hunted and silenced. Every patrol was turned into wreckage. The fleet bled, but it did not stop. And as it advanced, it grew. More rebels joined at every system. Outlaw clans swore allegiance. Even some council defectors, sickened by Vega Prime's extermination, turned their ships against their masters. By the time the fleet reached the throne system, it was no longer just human. It was a coalition of the broken, the enslaved, the enraged, and they were ready to kill gods. The throne world filled their view screens, a planet of impossible beauty, towers of crystal, oceans of fire, skies filled with glittering rings of defense stations. Around it circled fleets larger than anything humanity had ever faced. The Council had gathered everything, every warship, every weapon, every last ounce of power. They thought it would be enough. They were wrong. The battle began with silence. For a heartbeat, both sides stared across the void, fleets glittering like stars. Then the first volley fired. The sky ignited. Missiles streaked, beams cut through space, ships detonated in blossoms of fire. Human and rebel fleets charged headlong into the storm, shields screaming, hulls tearing apart. But they did not falter. Every human ship fought like it was the last. Every rebel crew burned with centuries of rage. Smugglers darted between capital ships, stabbing them in their guts. Insectoid freighters unleashed swarms of fighters that swamped destroyers. And humanity rammed, humanity detonated, humanity sacrificed. For every council ship that stood, 2 more fell. On the ground, the war was no less brutal. Dropships pierced the throne world's skies, disgorging soldiers into its crystal cities. Humans stormed palaces with plasma rifles and knives. Rebels dragged governors from their towers and executed them in the streets. The Council had thought themselves untouchable. Now their halls echoed with screams. But the throne was not undefended. From its core, the Council unleashed its final weapon. The eternal flame, a weapon older than their empire, hidden for millennia. A beam of pure energy, drawn from the planet's molten heart, capable of tearing fleets apart in a single strike. When it fired, half the rebel armada vanished in a blaze. Entire species died in moments. For a breath, It seemed over. But humanity did not retreat. Harrington, old and broken, stood on the bridge of the Vengeance. His body could barely move, his voice a rasp, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. He looked at the weapon tearing his fleet apart, then at his crew. "They built their throne on our backs," he whispered. "They burned our worlds. They thought they were gods. Let's remind them what men can do." He gave the order. The Vengeance dove. Every gun fired, every missile launched, every ounce of power poured into its engines. It dodged beams, tore through shields, ripped past destroyers. Its hull peeled away, decks collapsed. Crew screamed and died, but still it flew, straight into the heart of the throne world. The council chamber shook as alarms screamed. Counselors shrieked, demanding defenses, demanding retreat, demanding miracles. None came. On their screens, the Vengeance fell from the sky like a burning comet. Its engines roared, its weapons blazing, its hull crumbling, and on its bridge, Harrington stood tall, every scar of earth upon him. "Remember us," he said. Then he detonated the core. The explosion split the skies. The Vengeance tore into the eternal flame, igniting its power in a chain reaction. The throne world's core erupted. Molten fire bursting from its surface. Towers shattered, oceans boiled, continents cracked. In orbit, fleets watched in silence as the planet of gods died screaming. The council was gone. Their throne, their pride, their heart, obliterated. And in its place hung silence. The galaxy shook. With the council destroyed, their fleets shattered, their leaders dead, the empire collapsed overnight. Worlds declared independence. Slaves rose in chains. Outlaws became rulers. Rebels became nations. At the center of it all stood humanity. Not untouched, not unbroken. They had lost billions. They had bled more than any species. Earth was scarred, Bobo, its cities ashes, its oceans poisoned. But humanity had survived. And more than that, they had won. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed. Some feared humanity, whispering that they had replaced one empire with another. Others worshipped them, raising statues, chanting their name. Most simply watched, waiting to see what humans would do with their victory. But on Earth, among the ruins, survivors built monuments not to conquest, but to memory. To the dead who had carried bombs into tanks. To the pilots who had rammed ships twice their size. To the old commander who had driven the Vengeance into the heart of gods. The monuments bore no speeches, only one sentence carved in stone. We were prey. We chose to be predators. And in the silence after the war, one truth became clear. The Council had voted to invade Earth. What came next destroyed more than their complacency. It destroyed their empire. It destroyed their gods. And it birthed something the galaxy would never forget. Humanity.